Well, welcome everyone. This is Jennifer Witt, Director of ProjectManager.com, and we want to welcome you today on our webinar on how to track projects. It's one of the most common questions asked, not only on the forum, but some of the customers that we're working with on ProjectManager.com. So, of course, as you know, all the project managers out there who are either new to project management or those of you who have been in the field and managing projects for years. As you know, there are a million topics and a million different directions that we could go to on this, but we wanted to take an hour out today and just cover some of the top points that we think that affect some of the tracking that we do on our project. So I have on the right-hand side of your panel, you'll see a little box there. It's called your control panel. And if you notice, there is a questions area and also a chat area. So if you have questions during the session, we'll be taking some of the questions. I've got Tom Kellen. Say hello, Tom.
Hey there.
Tom Kellen's going to be answering some of your questions by chat, and we're going to be stopping periodically during the broadcast to answer some of your questions. So again, I'm your host, and so I'm Jennifer Witt, again, Director of ProjectManager.com, and if you've been on any of our other webinars, I always say I'm a student of projects. I really study projects that fail, why they fail, the ones that work successfully, why do they work successfully. I'm always studying project managers and looking at the ones who are successful and the ones who struggle. So try to compile different tips, tools, and techniques and best practices that I've found along the way, and that's what we want to share with you today. So if you look here, this is a little bit about our agenda. First of all, I want to talk about tracking, and again, best practices, give you some of the tips and some 4 specific areas, and then talk about next steps, some things that you can carry back and start immediately on your projects. But if we look in these areas under tracking, I want to look at some of the questions that we ask and some of the indicators that we watch. And we've compiled 6 best practices that we found that are just simple things that we can do that can have a big impact. And some of the tips we want to cover, there are 4 areas. We want to give some tips around scope, time, cost, and quality. And then the last one, some of the next steps. And we think there's one step that we find that can have a good impact. So if we look at tracking, again, we want to start with what questions should we be asking when we're tracking our projects? As you know, there's defined by the Project Management Institute, PMI, in their PMBOK guide, the Project Management Body of Knowledge. They have termed something the triple constraint, which we've all heard of, or if you haven't, here's how it's documented by PMI. It's called the triple constraint. We look at, in a project, we track scope, we track cost, we track time, and we track quality. And some of the questions that we should be asking along the way, either you as a project manager, maybe your stakeholders, or even your team members, you should always train everyone to continue to ask these questions. Is this in scope? So if someone brings something new on board during different phases of the project, continue asking, is this in scope? If it's under quality, always looking at, does this meet the specs? Because at the end of the project, the stakeholders, the clients, the customers, whoever's paying for this project has the authority to approve what's been done. So you want to be asking these questions all along the way so we don't get to the end of the project and find out that the deliverables that are being produced do not meet specs. And then cost. Are we under budget? So there are some sneaky little things that happen during the course of the project, unexpected costs that occur that have to do with issues and risks that occur. And so always asking, are we under budget? And then time. Are we on schedule? So these are some of the questions that we ask. And then some of the indicators that we watch for. So for each of these questions and each of these areas of the triple constraint, we're looking at variance. So what is variance? When we look at variance, we're looking at what was planned in the project and what's actually happening. So if you take planned minus actual, then for each of these areas we begin to get variances, and that's what we're managing, that's what we're tracking all along the way of the project, from beginning to the end of the project. So we've got the red, yellow, and green there, and so for a lot of people, when we look at metrics and when we begin looking at reporting that we deliver back to our team members, to our stakeholders, to our change control boards, we want to begin looking, and the indicators, the red, yellow, and green stand for red, of course. Red is something to be alarmed about. It's off track, that you need to dig deeper into the details to find out how do we get that back on track. The yellow meaning that this is something that could potentially cause problems, and then the green as, hey, this is great, this is on track, we're looking good here in this area. So before we go to the next area, I just want to check in with Tom and see, Tom, do we have any questions here related to this area so far? So far, we good?
Yeah, we're good right now.
Okay. So best practices. So again, as we're working with people with ProjectManager.com, of course, you know, we're a software company. We have software projects. So we work with many teams. We work with clients and teams in setting up projects using the software. So what we find is there are 6 best practices that we found that we feel like have a big impact in helping you to track your project. So in just starting out, these 6 have to do with the following. So number 1, assign specific people to tasks and deliverables. So when you're tracking your project, so you as a project manager, you're tracking the project as a whole, but there are many different people, there are many different organizations working on your projects. So by assigning specific people instead of a generic group, you have someone who's accountable for tracking the task and also the deliverables. You know who to go to find out the status of a deliverable. Many times we find when you go to generically just to one group or organization, the finger pointing. No one really knows who's accountable for those things. So number 2, provide online access to the project plan and the schedule. So more and more, it's just critical with teams being, you know, they're remote. Many teams, whether you're even in the same office building, maybe you're on a different floor, maybe if you're in the same city, you're in different buildings in the city. But now as we go more internationally and teams are in different time zones, they're in different countries, it's just critical that you have some way for your team members to get online access to the project plan and the schedule. So not only they're looking at things real time, but they're looking at the correct version. We've all run into those problems where maybe we're looking at an old version of the project plan or an old version of the schedule, so we're not even working on the right baseline project plan or schedule. And number 3, update things in real time. It's having your team members, all team members, update things real time instead of waiting to the end where people have time or, you know, catching up or thinking that's the last thing that they need to do. Reinforcing with all the team members, people who are assigned to the project, who are working on the task and deliverables, really updating those real time. That helps other people to know when to expect. As we look at the critical path and we look at dependencies, people know before the last minute that things may be late or if they're going to be even early. So it helps us all in planning. Number 4 is report anything off track immediately. Sometimes, you know, we've all seen the people on our teams, and maybe we're guilty of that as well, where we're working on an issue or a problem, and we think, well, let's try this and let's try that, and you think you're going to be able to find that solution, but then days go by, or maybe even weeks go by. So it's important to report anything that's off track immediately. Again, raising those issues. It's letting people know maybe it's not the green status anymore, it's the yellow status. Many times in politically charged environments, people are afraid to post anything outside the green status. But if you give your team, your stakeholders, your change control board the trust that those statuses really do mean things, the red, yellow, and green really do indicate the true status, then people are more willing to work with you and take your word for the truth, for credibility. Number 5 is escalate issues and risk quickly. So things can get resolved quickly if we raise them and begin escalating them, not letting them ride or just sit there on a log somewhere. And number 6, submitting any changes promptly, making decisions quickly, and rebaselining accordingly. So this number 6 is one of the big ones where it can make a huge difference between one of your projects becomes the statistic of a successful project or a failed project, because it's a matter of changes always do occur, right? So we get that perfect project plan done, the schedule baseline, and it looks great, and then changes begin happening immediately. That's just the nature of the beast. And right now, with many companies changing, the priorities are constantly changing. Resources are being swapped out. Maybe they're positioned to a higher priority project. So those things happen. And so it's a matter of submitting those, getting the decisions made on what to do, and then, again, rebaselining. So it's a matter of taking that to the change control board, getting the decisions made and the approval, and once you rebaseline, then it's agreed upon that maybe the schedule changes, the budget changes, or the scope. So those are some of the 6 best practices that we feel like it's important to bring forward and always remember in tracking your project. So before we go on to the tips, Tom, I want to see, are there any questions that we have right now on any of the best practices?
Yes, hang on just a second here. What is the main difference between the project plan and schedule?
Yes, so the project plan has all of the components. It includes the schedule, but the project plan incorporates all of the, it includes the plans and how you track the scope, how you track the budget, how you track issues. So it's the what, the how, and who of all of the 9 areas. So a lot of times you'll hear me reference, I know this audience is international, and there's some other methodologies out there, but for many people who follow PMI, the Project Management Institute, and their project management body of knowledge, so they have the 9 knowledge areas. So basically the project plan incorporates the processes, the methodology on who, what, when, and where that you track those things, but it also includes the schedule as well.
Then another question is, how important is the role of the project director in managing and helping the project manager?
Well, in organizations that do have a project director, to have their buy-in and support is critical. Many organizations may not have a project director, and it depends on the organizational structure of the organizations or the companies. But if there is a director, having them involved and having the support, so when issues get escalated, that they can actually have, that they are there to provide support to get those issues resolved quickly. And for a project director, for not only the project manager and the project director, one of the strongest assets that they have in their toolbox are relationships. So hopefully the project director has strong relationships among all the business units who may be involved, business units with it, internal partners, external partners, vendor partners, because really their role is helping us to escalate and resolve issues quickly.
Then there's a couple questions on clarification of what rebaselining is.
Yeah, so rebaselining, this is, I love this question because I go in and I actually audit a lot of projects and to see what's happening, and looking at projects that have gone off track are considered failing. And one thing that I notice is that the project manager or the project, the change control board, they're not re-baselining. So when you baseline something, it's the initial agreement of what's the scope, what's the budget, what's the timeline, what's the quality specs. So once that's all agreed upon in the initial phase of the project, that's what we call baseline, and then that's what we track against. So when we look at the planned, that is the planned, and then as we move along, actually what's happening. So when we look at variance, in the beginning I talked about variance. So variance is planned minus the actual. So if changes happen, which they do, so the project manager is to bring the changes to the change control board and help to get the change request evaluated and help the change control board know how this change is going to impact. Maybe it impacts the scope, maybe it impacts the timeline or the budget, or again the quality specs. Then the change control board has the authority to make the decision whether they're going to approve a change. Well, if they approve a change, that change could cause the schedule, say, to be moved out for 2 months. If the change control approves something, it could approve maybe $1 million of extra budget. It could, if the change control board approves the change, it could be adding resources. So if the change control board approves a change and approves that, they're agreeing. They're the voice for the stakeholders. They're the voice for the project. So if they agree to that change, then they're in agreement, and then the project manager should re-baseline that to say, okay, this is the new agreed upon schedule or the new agreed upon timeline or the budget. And so therefore it's agreed upon. If the project manager doesn't take the steps to re-baseline, then you're tracking against something that's old. So what happens is projects then look like they're failing when they're really not, because they've actually gone through the proper steps to get the change approved by the parties who agree that, yes, it's okay to extend the timeline. Yes, it's okay to increase the budget. Yes, it's okay to approve additional resources. So it's a huge difference between a failed or a successful project just by that simple step. It's just a matter of following a process. So I hope that answered the question. Those are great questions. Keep submitting those, and hopefully we'll continue to be able to answer those along the way. But let's look at some tips, because now that we're asking questions about re-baselining, and we're talking about the areas, we're talking about scope, we're talking about time, cost, and quality, let's look at some tips that we find that impact the tracking process. So I'm going to go through these quickly. Okay, so regarding scope, we feel like there's 7 tips on how to stay on track. I call it, the key is preventing scope creep. We've all heard of scope creep, but also the scope creeps. And I say that because actually, if I am a stakeholder of a project, or maybe I'm on the change control board, or if I'm in some other position besides the project manager, sometimes I can be a scope creep. And what that means is I can be one of those people who interject scope creep on a project if something's not careful, because I'm always looking at, I'm one of those people that can bring new ideas, why don't we do this? But as a project manager, what we're looking at is preventing scope creep, and the scope creeps, the people who interject it. And they're most likely the people we know, we love, and we trust on our projects. They're our friends. They're the people we get along with, and they're the people who come by and they ask those questions. They're like, well, can't you just do this? Can't you just do this while you're already in there? So say for those of you who are working on software projects, you're probably laughing because you've heard this. It's like, while they're working on the code, can't they just add this change too? or for those of you who are in construction, maybe while they're adding the second floor, can't they add an additional floor? So it's those people who ask those type of questions, like while you're in there, or while you're doing that, or all you have to do is, or it will not take that long to, so fill in the blank for all of those. Those are the traps we get into. So the tips are, number one, define the scope up front and agreed upon, and baseline it. Then number two, log changes. So of course changes are going to occur. So you document those, evaluate them, and get them approved. What are we going to do with them? Are we going to approve them, or are we going to wait for the next release, or are we going to disregard that one? So make decisions on the changes. And number three, re-baseline the schedule, the project, and the project plan. Number four is request additional funding and resources. If you have to do that, it's good to do it early and often. So as soon as you know it, then you've got to request the additional funding, because as you know, in most corporate environments, it takes, there is a process that has to go through. So what happens is, a lot of times the project managers, if they think additional funding is going to be needed, they wait too late, and what happens is the funding can be approved, but because there is a process, it takes longer and can delay the project unnecessarily. Number five is watching for the signs. So what does that mean? So you as a project manager watching for signs, for instance, if things are too quiet, like if your team is just quiet and no one's saying anything, if no one's raising any issues, or there are no changes and things are just like mum's the word, you kind of have an indication of, something's going on and I need to find out what's happening. Or if things are always okay. So if you as a project manager are checking with your team members and everything's always thumbs up, everything's good, hunky-dory, then that's kind of a sign that you need to dig deeper, because on projects there's always issues, risks happening that you need to watch for. Number six is setting priorities, and that's through the CCB. The Change Control Board is working with the business units, working with all the different groups to set the priorities. And the priorities will change, and you need to know how they're going to impact your project, because a change on a different project may become a higher priority, therefore may entail taking some of your critical resources, and you need to know how that's going to impact your project and the scope of your project. And then, again, avoiding the traps of those little sayings that your friends or other people on the team may say that is you as a project manager, if you get into the trap of handling these little favors for people, could get you in trouble, specifically on scope. So any questions on the scope?
Not specifically on scope.
Okay. Time. There are 10 tips for time management, and the key is really establishing good habits. So you as a project manager, not only establishing good habits for you as a project manager, but constantly you are the leader of your team and helping your team members also establish good habits. So when I go over these tips, it's for you, the project manager, and you helping guide your team members with these as well. Number one, purging clutter. I know for myself, I have many different projects going, and I have too many things going, and I just have too much clutter. So if I remove clutter, like old projects, like making a decision, hey, this project is shut down, or this is not a priority, I need to just get the clutter gone. I throw things away. I either store it, I shred it, I purge it, so that I'm not looking at it. As long as I'm looking at something, whether it's physical clutter on my desk or in my email or something on my project plan, as long as I'm looking at it, then I have to take time out of my day to make decisions and then to reevaluate, is that something I need to do? So just purge clutter. Number two, avoid energy suckers. You know, they're the toxic people. They're the people who come around who steal your energy. They always want to camp out in your office. They're the people who call, who want to get you stuck on a call for 30 minutes or an hour. So knowing who those people are and really setting boundaries and not letting take your time. But also they could be some of your customers who find some of your resources. So it's always keeping a watch out on your team members and making sure the end customer, the client, or even some of the change control board members aren't camping out and stealing some of the valuable time of your team members, because that takes away from their time that you have allocated. Number 3 is in establishing systems, and again, it's that, time, having systems in place where you manage your time. Number 4 and 5 kind of work together, blocking working time. So blocking out on your schedule, on your calendar, where you have committed meetings, regularly scheduled meetings, where you have project deliverables. So something where you're already committed in your day, get that on your schedule, so then that way you won't overbook yourself, and if someone has access to your calendar, they won't overbook you as well. That's one of the leading problems of people who can't manage their time, is they don't have things blocked out on their schedule. Also, the non-working time. I have time blocked out on my calendar for in the morning. I have certain things that I do in the morning. I have workout time, I have meditative time, and I have planning time. And those are the things that I have to do in the morning that I have to set aside for myself to get ready and grounded for the day. And so I block that out so no one can schedule anything during that time. And then sync all of your devices. For most of us, for most project managers, we're rarely at our desk. We're always on the go. We're between meetings. We're traveling. And so if you've ever encountered where maybe you don't have the latest calendar updates on your calendar, maybe you have most of us have mobile phones, but maybe it's not synced with our computer. So we're scheduling things, and many of the people, and I kind of balance even my electronic devices versus a little day timer. So if that is not synced up, invariably you're going to set yourself up to overbook yourself. And again, that gets into time management. And when we can't manage our time, then we're not getting the task done that we're supposed to. We're not completing deliverables on time. So we are impacting the project. Number 7 is allowing calendar access. Look, some people are protective of their time. They don't want people to see. But nowadays, there are ways to block or put things on your calendar as private. So some people can't see private, but they cannot book things over things that are private time. But it's really critical for people who are on your project team, your change control, your stakeholders, to have access, to have viewing time to see, are you available? Where are you, and can they schedule a meeting? Because ad hoc meetings always come up. Can we have a conference call? Can we have a meeting? So people need to be able to see that. And then number 8 is a huge one. It's being able to say no and set boundaries. Because if we can't set boundaries, we're just, we have no control of our time. So therefore, we, the project managers, our time, we're not managing our time, and then we're not managing the schedule up to date, and then which other people rely on the schedule, the project plan. So we set other people up for failures, just the pure fact that we can't say no. So that's a big one. Number 9 is stopping drive-bys and hot potatoes. Those are people who like to stop by maybe on the Friday afternoon or at the end of the day, and maybe they have had an issue that they've been working with, so they decide to drop it in your lap and leave you there working late or working on weekends. So it's stopping the drive-by or the hot potatoes and putting that back to the people who really need to handle that issue. It's not always that we have to accept that. Again, it gets back to boundaries. And number 10 is changing routines when routines change. A lot of times when I go in and audit people and what's happening on the projects, they still have routines on there that aren't even done anymore. The groups aren't even there. The process isn't even there. So when things change or groups change or people change, you need to keep things up to date. So those are 10 huge things that impact time management. So again, if we can't manage our own time, this impacts our time available that we have to work on tasks and deliverables of the projects. So again, reiterating that it's not only time management for ourselves, but helping to school, helping mentor our project team members on that as well. So any questions on time?
Well, there's one about how to avoid the trap of feature creep when it's laid out by a senior stakeholder.
Well, again, so a senior stakeholder, again, they know that there is a change control process. So that needs to be formally submitted to the Change Control Board. And the Change Control Board has the key, representatives of the stakeholders who have the authority. It's who the stakeholders have appointed, who they've authorized to evaluate the changes, to make the decisions. And of course, the Change Control Board, because a lot of them are the senior members of different groups and organizations that are represented by the project. Again, if they need some additional support or approvals from the senior executives, they will certainly do that. But to submit those through the formal Change Control Board.
That might tie in. There's a couple questions on how to say no to superiors if they ask for tasks to be done.
Yeah, that gets back to what I found is that those people have gained more respect. You gain more credibility and more respect from the senior leadership if you can push back. Because what happens is people feel like, oh my God, my senior executive or my VP or my director has asked for this, so oh my God, I've got to do it. Well, a lot of times if you interview a lot of these people, and what happens is they raise an issue, and their expectation is that the project manager will take it through a formal process. They know that a formal process for projects should be there. I mean, every executive I've interviewed, that's what they want. They want processes, they want methodologies, they want something to be in place for those things to be evaluated. So a way to say that is, thank you, what we'll do is we'll submit that to the Change Control Board, and we'll have it evaluated and communicate back with them, let them know. So it doesn't have to be no way. So some of the responses does not have to be no, we can't do that. It's diplomacy. It's diplomacy. You're working with the senior peer. So professionalism counts in how you answer it, but to let them know, yes, thank you for the changes, thank you for the feedback. What we'll do is I'll be sure to get that documented, submitted to the Change Control Board so we can evaluate it and communicate with them. Let them know, follow up with them. Just wanted to let you know, just wanted to follow up and let you know that we submitted that and it's going to be evaluated, and we'll get back with you. And just keep communicating back with them. So by saying no, it doesn't have to be rude and it doesn't have to be mean. But by saying no and setting boundaries helps to contain and help track and keep the project on track. And after all, that is what the executives do want. They want the project to be delivered as expected.
Then there's been a couple questions about if you could clarify number 9, the drive-bys and hot potatoes, and offer any suggestions on those.
Yeah, those were, I had to tell you, 8 and 9 were huge for me to learn because I was one of those in an environment where that was just the modus operandi, and that would kill me. And so I would be the one working the late hours, missing holidays, weekends, trying to get everything done. And I learned after interviewing and talking with a lot of executives, I learned exactly what I'm telling you now is what their expectations are. And so by number 9, the drive-bys and the hot potatoes, is just talking with those people saying, if somebody gives a drive-by, like dropping something off on your desk, it's like asking them, say, okay, what is this? And have them explain. oh, well, this is a report that I need to have done. Well, ask them, okay, well, when did you find out about this? Well, I've had it on my desk since, last week. And then they may say, well, I need it tomorrow. And then ask them, is it really necessary that it has to be done tomorrow? And then find out why, because, a lot of times they don't really need it by tomorrow. They just say that. I've been shocked to learn that the drive-bys and the hot potatoes are not really, that hot. I learned that on many projects where, people just threw out an arbitrary date, and they may say, well, I wanted to get that on my desk before I left for vacation. And then, or they may say, well, you know what, I'm going on vacation next week, and to be honest, I'm not really going to have time to look at it until Wednesday when I get back. So a lot of times it's just talking with the people. It's just not just accepting it, like dropping it and letting them run away. Like have some actual dialogue with the people and ask them to tell you more why it's so important and get them to drive down why that date. Because when you do, most of the time they really don't need it by that day. It's not really anything business driven that's going to require you to do it by that date. And if it is, you're probably going to have to say, ask them if it's a senior executive. I mean, you have to say, well, I've got this critical deadline due. Does this override? And have them help, prioritize your work. If you're a direct report to them, have them reprioritize your work. So, because, I mean, in truth, you only have so many hours in a day. So something's going to be off. So if you accept that hot potato or the drive-by and do that instead of something else that you're accountable for, you're going to miss one or the other. So it's best to talk it through. So candid discussions. What I found is most people are just for some reason intimidated to talk with their senior leadership. And they're just people. And the more you talk with them and raise the issues, the more credibility and respect they actually have for you. So those are some of the things that I've experienced.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Okay, so that's time. All right, let's talk about cost. Here's what I call the silent killer. The silent killer for cost has to do with expense tracking, because there are different things that are cost on the project, for cost for resources, right? Whether it's cost for your people, say whether the employees or their contractors, their cost for equipment or maybe software, their cost for license, their cost for legal, accounting, all different costs. But what is the sneaky part that are sometimes hard to account for are tracking expenses. And those are things like, for instance, if you have people who travel on your project, so maybe someone has overlooked that you've got people who are traveling, so you've overlooked airfare, you've overlooked hotel and expensive, you've overlooked meals. You've also overlooked expenses, for instance, the things that come up like, oh no, we hired some new people and now we need to order laptops for the people, so we need 10 new laptops, or you need a new printer, or maybe you're doing a software upgrade and you didn't account for Microsoft or, say, Apple coming out with a new release, so you've got to pay for new license. So those things don't get reincorporated into the project. What happens at the end of the project, when these bills start coming in, there's kind of the after effect. So what happens is accounting gets these expenses, or the people on your team now begin submitting expense reports, and they add up. So therefore, they're the silent killer. So what happens is there's 6 tips for tracking expenses that again affect your cost. Remember, the whole thing we're talking about is tracking your project. So we're looking for variances. We're looking for why the difference between the planned cost or your planned budget versus your actual. So these are some of the actual expenses that would come through. So we have found that if you establish systems, for tracking them, like maybe people track their time and expenses, their travel and airfare in either project management software or even Excel, something that the team members of the people who are incurring the expenses can track these and get them to the project manager. Number 2 is providing online access, again, so that now that you've established the system, providing online access so people can get to things easily and not get hidden in someone's email. So maybe someone submitted this long, detailed email to the project manager, and maybe they didn't see it for weeks or got hidden in other emails. So providing a system, providing online access so you know where to find those expenses, and then they can get it submitted to accounting or whoever your finance group is, whoever is tracking the expenses. Number 3 is identifying budget items. And the budget items being remembering to account for the fixed budget items, their variable budget items, and then once you identify them, you've got to account for, again, all the resources, whether they're people, they're employees or contractors, because they have different types of costs associated. You've got to know, like, office space or lease space. There's equipment, there are computers, there are license, legal, accounting, all types of budget items to include. And then once you get the budget items identified, then actually creating a budget. So sometimes there are different spreadsheets floating around, but it's actually pulling together the project budget. And then assigning specific people or specific person to track these specific expense items. So there may be someone who is responsible for tracking expense items, and then you, again, have different people who are on your team who may be doing the traveling, doing the purchasing. So having someone that you can go to who can specifically answer those questions. And again, a specific person versus just an organization or group where no one knows who. If you go to that group, they're like, well, we don't know who's tracking that, or we don't know anything about it. And then number 6 is tracking and controlling real time. So again, what happens is the silent killer being, if it's not done in real time, and then these expenses come rolling in and it's affecting your budget, so therefore your plan versus actual. So if your actual budget or your actual cost are more than your planned, then you're already over budget. So that's not a good path to be down. So if you track these real time instead of waiting to the end where these are the surprises that roll in as you're closing out the project, it's not as devastating. It's easier to control up front. So any questions we have on the cost?
Yeah, there's a couple of questions about like how do you handle resources that are shared and their priorities come in conflict, and then also how do you calculate the cost of a shared resource?
Yeah, there are multiple components of that, and that's pretty typical. They're shared. Number 1, they're shared among, they're resources who can be shared among organizations, and they can be shared among the projects. So what happens is you have to get the percent of time, and somewhere, someone in the organization knows this, because from a finance perspective, in the organization, someone's paying for that person. So there's typically in the finance group, the finance says, Jennifer Witt is a resource, and we have her being paid for out of these organizations. So maybe marketing is paying for, 60% of her time, and the operations organization is paying for 40%. So that's happening on the background, and that's who's paying Jennifer Witt's, say, salary. And then so you as the project manager need to know that. That's the origin. And then so you know how to split her project work up 60 and 40%. And then even at that, if I'm allocated 60% to marketing, I could be working on multiple projects. So you keep having to break it down. You have to know how many hours that Jennifer Witt or your resource is allocated to that project. You have to keep going down to the number of hours you have available for that resource to work on your project. The killer is everyone assumes, not everyone, but a lot of people, when I go in and do assessments, the assumption is made that every resource is 100% to that project, and that's no way. So therefore, the person may be working on 4 projects, so each project manager has them 100% on each of the 4 projects. And so maybe they're assigned 40 hours a week on each of the 4 projects, and that's not doable. I mean, everyone loses. The person is set up for failure, and so is the project. So you have to keep going down to the number of hours, and then the hours affects not only the number of hours that I have available to work on the project, which impacts your schedule, and it impacts the budget. So there is rigor there that needs to be done, and also with that is also blocking out time for the person's vacation, is talking to the resource, knowing how much time do you have available. So they may be split up among 4 projects, but they also I used to have a resource who would take a month off in the summer with for their children's school break. And so I would have to know to block that person out in the whole month of July. So it's knowing your team members. You have to know them personally, know who they are, know how much time they're assigned to your project, break it down by hours, which impacts your schedule and your budget. Hopefully that answers your question. It's not easy because it's variable.
I think that's it for now.
Okay, good. All right, so here we are on quality, okay? So many times depending upon what group you're in, I'm actually broadcasting live from Huntsville, Alabama today, the land of NASA, Boeing, Redstone Arsenal, civil defense, all types of things. So quality here means a lot. If you're talking about sending a rocket up to the moon, or if you're talking about rockets or shuttles and all kinds of things that they send up, quality is important. And so some groups, maybe it depends on what the project is, sometimes quality is overlooked. So depending upon where you are, we feel like quality still is one of the things to be tracked in a project. And we find 5 tips on how to meet quality targets. So one of the key on this one is increasing stakeholder satisfaction and team support. It's amazing how this one really, can gain kudos for not only the project manager, but the project and the whole team. So the idea is these 5 tips is defining quality. What does quality mean? It means different things to different organizations. So you could be in the same company, but different organizations, depending upon what type of company. Again, here in NASA, Boeing, Redstone Arsenal, quality means a lot versus some software companies. They may be getting something time to market. So I've got a mentor who says version 1 is better than version none, meaning get something out there. Don't try to make it perfect, because if you're getting something time to market and there's a great need for something, then it's better to get the product out there. And then you can always improve it along the way. So defining for your project what the quality parameters are. Then setting targets. Setting targets is, how is the best way to do that? So we feel like you can have workshops or calls in order to find out what the targets are by either interviewing or having workshops with your stakeholders, your team members. You also have to consider legal. Are there any legal requirements? Are there any compliance issues that we have? Depending upon what industry you're in, there are also compliance issues that by law, by government law, you have to maintained. So it's important to know what the targets are and knowing that they're realistic. Number 3 is communicating the targets. You've got to communicate to the people who need to know what the targets are. You need to know who are going to test the deliverables, who's going to test the products to make sure that they meet these targets and that they are approved. And the big thing, too, is approving them. And then measuring the targets, knowing who's going to, how are we going to measure these, and who's going to do the measuring. Who's responsible for those? Who's responsible for getting those back on track? What is the process what's the process if they don't meet the specs? What do we do with those? How do we get them back in the process and get them up to spec? And number 5 is taking action, knowing, again, the process of what do we do, who's responsible for this, how do we get it done, how do we escalate the issues. Also looking at if this doesn't meet the quality specs, do we cancel it, do we dispose of it, what do we do with this, if it doesn't meet it, do we cancel the project, do we back something out? So those are the different things about quality and the metrics and tracking for your project. So are there any questions on the tracking of the quality?
Yeah, there's a question about how do you, is quality a constraint? And then also, how do you measure targets?
Yeah, well, first of all, you've got to define what the quality targets are, and then you've got to set the targets, and then depending upon how they are, you know, it depends. It's like software. So software quality metrics could be in software, the number of defects. You could be measuring defects. You can maybe only have so many defects in a software release. If you do some, say, steel, I used to do some work with U.S. Steel, and U.S. Steel they literally had machines who measured the gauge of the steel, and they would have to, depending upon what the steel was being used for, so when the steel gets produced, it goes out and gets used for different things. It had to have a certain gauge. Same thing with plastics. So it's setting the targets, and then depending upon what industry and what you're measuring is how you measure the targets. So it depends upon what industry you're talking about. It also could be like in a call center. Call centers have metrics on calls. They may measure calls and dropping calls. How long does it take to resolve a certain issue if a customer calls in with a problem? They may measure how long it takes to resolve a problem. So systems have to be put into place. I hope that isn't vague, but it truly does depend upon what industry and what you're actually measuring.
Then there's a couple questions on quality, like who defines it, and is it defined by stakeholder satisfaction, or are there other parameters that define quality?
Well, in defining it, that's a good question, and that was kind of one of the things in the first one is defining quality. What does it mean for your project or your organization? So the people who would be involved with that would be, the form you could do that is workshops, facilitated sessions, interviews, calls, polls or surveys, but getting information from different people, because different people are going to have a different perspective on things. So you want to poll your stakeholders, you want to poll the change control board members, your team members, because if you're a technical team, whether it's software, construction, engineering, the team members are going to have more insight in some of the targets and things not to forget. Like, oh, by the way, you know, remember we did this project last time, and we need to consider these things. Also, polling the legal group, or even accounting, you know, if it's finance. So there's a lot of rigor that needs to go into what does quality mean for your group. You know, there are different companies who produce software that we all use, right? And, you know, there's one software company that's like, that has been branded out there that we are all familiar with. I won't say the name, but one software company is big on get the software out there, get it time to market, because we want to release the features because our target market is asking for these features. They're not fully tested, but they've been tested enough that we can get these out to market. And then once we get them out to market, our customers are going to help us know how to, fix them. And they know that there's going to be time where we're going to release additional releases to fix these problems. Then there's another software vendor who wants to fully test something so that when it's released, it's been very thoroughly tested and the customer experience is more, a different customer experience. One's not right, one's not wrong, it's just different approaches. And you have to consider that for your projects and your organizations. That's why we ask, what does quality mean? And it's got to be defined specifically for your project and your group. It's not carte blanche the same for everyone, for everything.
Good deal. All right. It looks like we got about 5 minutes left, so I'll let you continue on.
Yeah, so these are great questions. Again, this is just 1 hour. This is one of the best topics that we love because it can truly make or break projects. And we wanted to bring in some of the best practices and tips. So when we go in and we look at these groups and we do assessments and look at the best practices and tips, the things that we can sum this up in is 3 ways to best track your project is. The key is to organize your work. So you as the project manager, organize yourself best that you can in putting systems in place. And these 3 things always stand out if you boil it down to summarizing everything. It's sharing project plans easily to all the people involved who need to know what's being done, when and where, what they're responsible for. Sharing that so they can get to it easily and manage it real time. Managing team activities online, for people to be able to get access to it easily online, and then tracking progress daily. So you as the project manager and tracking things real time and schooling your team to do that as well. So people ask, where can I start? Well, this is where we started. So again, at projectmanager.com, we're working with many teams, many organizations, working with the users of our software. So we've incorporated 6 capabilities into our software so you can track your project better. So we've incorporated a dashboard, one that you can customize so you can constantly look at these variance reports. Remember in the beginning we talked about variance, the planned minus the actual, so you know, are we on track? Are we off track? Are we over budget, under budget? Does this meet the spec? That doesn't meet the spec. And then we've also incorporated a project planner and intelligent reporting, a way to manage your team activities online, and a way for you to track results and collaborate online. Being able to collaborate online, if you give people the ability to get online and collaborate with you, remember your team, they're great resources. You've hired them. They're on your team for specific reasons, for their expertise, and leveraging them is huge for the success of not only the project, but for you, the project manager. So if you're asking, okay, that's where you projectmanager.com started, but where can I start? So we feel like this is where you can start. Try our software at projectmanager.com and check it out. We have a free trial. It's a $25 value for free, and you can look at it and you can see if you wanted to know, like, what do these dashboards look like? What could, if I use projectmanager.com, what does it look like? These are just some screenshots. To me, I'm very visual, so a picture is worth 1,000 words. So when you're talking about, here's like projects and what % complete are they. Here's how you can track tasks. Here's different, task names, and over to the side you can see visually who. Remember, we say specifically, we sign someone specifically, and we can see, Mike is 59%, Jennifer Jones is 100% on different tasks. Here we can look at issues, red, yellow, green. We're always looking at how how are we? And this gives us, if something is yellow or red, we can drive down. If it's green, hey, that's good to go. I don't have to spend time in looking at these things. Here's expenses. Remember, the silent killer on expense reports is giving people an online way to go in and easily create and submit their expenses. And here's what some of the reports look like. This is a dashboard. This is a sample dashboard of what a project looks like for time, cost, resources. And you can begin to see, the status of the task on your project. Remember, I said it's important to have people to have access to your calendar and look and see when you're available, what meetings are going on, and what milestones are due at what time. And here is like the workload. It's important to look at the different team members. See, here's 3 team members, and see here's how they're allocated. So this is their workload. So if Jennifer Jones, Mike Smith, and Sam are over multiple projects, you don't want to allocate them 100% on 4 projects. So these are just some of the tools that, we incorporated in projectmanager.com. We're giving you a visual. You may have your own systems. Some people I talk with are trying to, figure out, how do I get these in place? And these are just some of the ways we try to incorporate all of these tools in for you. So again, sharing your project plans and managing your teams online and tracking progress daily, we think are the best ways to manage a project. So again, we hope you'll give us a try. Start the free trial. Go to projectmanager.com and you'll see the Start the Free Trial button there. And we certainly do appreciate your questions that you've asked. And we hope that the agenda today and talking about tracking and the best practices, tips, and the next steps, we hope you glean some things here in helping you track your projects better. So again, we want to thank you, and we hope you'll join us next week on our webinar series from projectmanager.com. Thank you.